It's showtime. Ladies and gentlemen, it is I, your host, the Star Rail Crusader, and today I have a rather salacious question for you. Are Star Rail characters becoming irrelevant? And the answer is no. But also yes. Kinda. Well, to be honest, it's complicated. The term irrelevant can mean a lot of different things, so I think first we need to understand the context because in most cases, characters will actually find a way to be relevant. For example, from a gameplay perspective, this is a turn-based strategy game, so even if power creep phases characters out of the meta, they can still be useful in specific strategies or game modes, and when needed, the devs can buff them, so most characters will find their way into relevancy even if they're not meta. From a design standpoint, every character adds variety and appeal to different players. Their aesthetics, voice acting, and animations all help make them feel meaningful, so that's also relevant. And finally, from a narrative angle, the characters' stories are the emotional core of the game. But at the same time, this is a game that regularly introduces new characters through banners, so it's inevitable that not every character can be central to the story. And if they're contributing little to the overarching plot, the characters will find themselves irrelevant. And I think it's from this narrative perspective that Star Rail finds itself in a weird place. On the one hand, Star Rail has some of the most iconic characters in gacha history. Characters like Kafka, Venturine, Acheron, and Firefly are all gacha Hall of Famers. They're all over the internet, and people really do feel attached to these characters because of how long-lasting their stories are. But on the other hand, you gotta wonder where are they once their role in the story ends? How do we get to interact with them once their banner run is over? I mean, outside of reruns and the occasional event, the game actually does shockingly little to keep them alive in the player's mind from a narrative perspective. No hangouts, no friendships, not even a small update that says, hey, remember this person? Of course, this isn't true for every character, so in this video, I don't just want to talk about character relevancy to the plot, but I also want to mention things the devs could potentially do to keep them from being completely forgotten. It's a maze of a topic, to be honest, yet nevertheless, it's a journey I would like you to join me on. So, step right up and settle down, my dear audience, as today we explore how does Star Rail narratively keep its characters relevant and what more could the devs do to keep them from becoming forgotten. So before we ideate on how to keep a character relevant, I think it's important to first understand the core nature of Star Rail's story, as this fundamentally shapes how we should think about the characters. Honkai Star Rail is a space adventure centered on a crew traveling the galaxy aboard a train, visiting new worlds along the way. Each planet is unique, separated by huge distances, and every destination carries its own distinct flavor of story depending on the setting. It's a journey where we get to experience new things, but also one that requires the Express to move forward, because adventure by its very nature means leaving things behind. This is why I firmly believe that outside of the main crew, most of the characters should not be recurring in the main story. There are some exceptions, but for the most part, I think they should be left to pursue their own lives, goals, and dreams, separate from the main narrative. Part of the journey is leaving things behind, and by forcing characters to be in every single arc for the sake of being relevant, fundamentally destroys the essence of the story. You are a trailblazer, and trailblazing means leaving behind the familiar in order to venture into the unknown. I mean, Asta and Arlen are just ordinary researchers. It wouldn't make sense for them to suddenly start running shipments on the Lafu. Similarly, Bronya, Zila, and Natasha fought to secure a better future for Belobog, so it wouldn't make sense for them to be gambling on Penacony when their people still need them as leaders. I'm not saying you should completely forget these characters, but I also think there's a beauty in having them autonomously pursue their own goals and aspirations. It makes them feel alive, as if they exist beyond the story itself. In many ways, it reminds me of One Piece, as both stories share a similar structure. The Straw Hat Pirates journey from island to island, with each stop bringing new adventures, but not every character they meet joins the crew, and once their role in the story ends, they stay behind to pursue their own lives. But even though they don't return to the main plot, there are subtle things that One Piece does that Star Rail could learn from, things that keep us updated on past characters while also making it feel organic to the world, and one of those things are wanted posters. See, after every major arc, the Straw Hats do something infamous enough to raise their bounties, and while the crew's reactions are always funny, what truly makes these sequences special is how other characters in the world respond. And in these little vignettes, we get to see friends, foes, and other old fan favorite characters. It gives us a little peek into their lives, and these moments do a good job at making us remember older characters who might have faded into the background of the main narrative. Just because characters are no longer central to the story doesn't mean their own personal journeys have to end. Hints of them growing and evolving independently makes the universe feel alive and can go a long way to satiate fans of those characters. And again, I think this is an area Star Rail could definitely improve on. Rather than haphazardly forcing old characters back into the main plot for relevance, Star Rail could use its strength as an interactive medium to keep their stories alive. The thing about video games is that they don't need to rely solely on cutscenes or dialogue. They can implement systems and side content that could give these characters the staying power they need. These small interactions wouldn't disrupt the narrative, and it would also reward players who've grown attached to these characters. The key here is subtlety. Let characters have interactions and growth outside the spotlight without derailing the whole story. So the question then becomes, where should Star Rail start? And I think the simplest way to start is with birthdays. It is wild, out of all of Hoyoverse's current games, Star Rail's characters are the only ones that don't celebrate their birthdays. Except March 7th, and even then that kind of feels like a technicality because that's just the day she was found, not her actual birthday. Birthdays are meaningful, both in-game and real life, because they give us a chance to reconnect with people we otherwise don't often get to see. It's a day dedicated to a particular person and serves as the perfect opportunity to get a glimpse into that character's life. Take Genshin for example. Arataki Ito's birthday was celebrated with special artwork on social media, a message written in his voice, and in-game mail containing some level up material. It may not seem like much, but it was enough to light up a whole section of the player base who took the time to share their appreciation and favorite memories of that character. Star Rail could easily implement something similar. After all, they have no shortage of talented artists and writers, so creating custom birthday posts for social media shouldn't be an issue. As for in-game, there's actually an instance where characters will send you fun and personality-filled messages, but that only happens for 3 days and then it's over. And again, that's hardly enough to keep them feeling relevant once their banner ends. Birthdays could fix this. Imagine if, on their special day, the Trailblazer can send them a personal message which can spark a new unique conversation with them. It would breathe new life into these characters long after their banners disappear. And if they wanted to go a step further, they could use the social media art as an in-game reward for the Trailblazer to put up in their room. I can already see the Shrine of Imaginary Men people are going to put up if this ever happens. But again, birthdays are just one example of a narrative tool Star Rail can use to give older characters more staying power. And when we get these little things in order, we can move on to the bigger events that truly connect people with the characters of Star Rail. So, let's talk about companion quests, shall we? Originally, companion quests were meant to be side stories that focused on specific characters in order to give them more backstory and personality. Characters like Arla, Natasha, Hawk, and Yukong have smaller roles in the main story, so these quests were made to flesh them out. The issue was that very few players actually had the motivation to complete these companion quests. Since they were just side quests, they lacked meaningful stakes, introduced no new gameplay, and their presentation was frankly bare bones, which is why many players skipped over them. And as a developer, you'd naturally wonder whether the time and resources invested in these quests were really worth it, and what could you make that players could actually engage with. And this is what I think sparked the changes we started to see in the Vita Infinita questline. In this anthology of quests, we start to see main characters like March and Dan Heng become central to these quests. Their stories begin to carry deeper implications, not just for themselves, but for the world at large. In Yang Cheng's quest, they introduce Jing Liu and give her a full animated cutscene, and by the time we roll into the final quest in the chain, it has basically become a full-blown event, complete with cinematic moments, meaningful character development, and lasting consequences for the world of Star Rail. So, problem solved, right? Well, not really, because things start to get more complicated with the introduction of a new quest type, the Trailblaze Continuance. Now, according to the official description, Trailblaze Continuances are interlude missions that continue the story of previously visited worlds. But when actually looking under the hood, these are actually just very elaborate and high-budget companion quests. Sure, they involve a large part of the cast, have elaborate cutscenes, and leave consequences on the wider world, but at its core, they're focused around one central character and their own personal conflict. These new missions introduced lore and impacted the wider world with the introduction of concepts such as the Stonehearts, Dr. Primitive, and the Borison, but the heart of these stories was centered around characters like Topaz, Rappa, and Fei Xiao. These quests had production value, they had an impact on the world, and most importantly, they managed to naturally make the characters settle in with the rest of the cast. And if a character doesn't end up featured in a Trailblaze Continuance, they usually appear in an event, which now often includes full narrative arcs. The events also tend to be more engaging than traditional side quests, largely because they introduce new gameplay mechanics or systems. There's always a gameplay incentive alongside the story, which makes them more appealing than purely dialogue-heavy content. Take Luca, for example. He already had one of the best companion quests in Belobog, and then got a sequel to that in the form of the War Dance arc. It was well voiced, expanded his story meaningfully, and even came with a unique twist on the turn-based gameplay. So now the lines have become blurred. What's the difference between companion missions, events, and Trailblaze Continuances when they have the same level of production quality? And at this point, they probably just went screw it and started incorporating companion quests into the structure of the main story altogether. The first clear example of this was probably in patch 2.2, which abandoned the Trailblazer's point of view entirely to immerse players in Aventurine's backstory and personal journey. This converted many people into Aventurine fans, and if you weren't, you probably didn't like that patch because it was almost solely dedicated to his story. This character-driven approach has now become the norm in Star Rail, with the Amphoria storyline basically functioning as a chain of elaborate companion quests telling the broader narrative through the perspective of the featured character. It's inevitable some people might not enjoy this kind of structure. I mean, if you're not a fan of a particular character, you might find that part of the story less engaging. But I think this format works really well for a game like Star Rail, especially since it introduces a new character every month and a half. It gives each one a meaningful role in the world and enough depth for players to genuinely connect with them while also giving the story an emotional tether. I for one initially didn't think I was going to pull for Anaxa because he just looked like an edgy dude with an eye patch, but once I finished his leg of the Amphorius arc, I just knew I had to get this man at any cost. Character-driven stories stand out because it emphasizes the choices and growth of its characters rather than relying solely on plot twists or external events. These narratives draw their strength from how characters evolve and respond to challenges, creating a deeper, more human connection with the audience. It's those emotions that tend to linger long after the story ends because players see a part of themselves reflected in the character's struggles and triumphs. I think that's one of the biggest reasons why Star Rail characters tend to leave such lasting impressions. Their personal journeys are tightly woven into the broader narrative. Of course, this approach doesn't always land. Characters like Fugue and Linksha, for example, felt somewhat shoehorned into the story because their banners were running. And again, if you don't connect with a particular character, it can make the entire patch feel underwhelming. But more often than not, I think the style of storytelling is what makes the newer Star Rail arcs so memorable and the characters feel so iconic. So, the long and short of it is this. The reason companion quests don't exist in Star Rail is because those character-driven stories have been seamlessly woven into almost every other part of the game. This allows for stories to have real emotional stakes, character development, and a level of production value that standalone side quests typically wouldn't have. That's a big part of why these characters have such a long-lasting impact on the player base. They're not just side content, they're integral to the story itself. But still, that leaves us with an important question. How can Star Rail keep these characters relevant after their role in the story ends? And for that, we need to take a little look at a series called Persona. In the Persona series, the basic gameplay loop revolves around balancing everyday student life with supernatural dungeon crawling. At night, players enter mysterious dungeons filled with enemies and use turn-based combat to clear them out. During the day, they have to choose how to spend their time as a normal high school student, be it studying, working at a part-time job, or hanging out with friends. These choices improve personal stats and strengthen bonds, which in turn enhance the player's combat abilities. It's an airtight gameplay loop, but what I want to focus on is the hanging out with your friends part. The social links, otherwise known as Confidant in P5, is a core gameplay system that ties together the game's social simulation and combat mechanics. Each social link is tied to a specific character in the story, like friends, classmates, family members, or even unusual individuals. These characters have 10 ranks, and the only way to rank them up is by hanging out with said character. As you spend time with them and raise the link's rank, you gradually uncover their struggles, like dealing with insecurities, loneliness, or responsibility, and help them work through it. These stories are often grounded, human, and relatable, creating a sense of connection between the player and the characters. Sure, they sometimes affect the main plot, but really, they're isolated stories that enforce Persona's themes of identity, personal growth, and the power of human connection. It mirrors the protagonist's own journey. While they start off alone, it's their relationships that give them strength, shape their identity, and ultimately influence the outcome of the story. Now, I'm not asking for a full-blown, in-depth social link system in Star Rail, but I do think there's a lot the game could implement to make characters feel more alive and relevant. And honestly, it wouldn't be that difficult because they already have the building blocks in place for a pseudo-social link system. The world is filled with spots where we get to see characters hanging out, and there's a wealth of voice lines that hint at their hobbies, likes, and dislikes. All that's missing are a few scripted events that let us engage with them in their daily lives. I mean, imagine exploring the wilderness with the Lynx, running security drills with Arlan, or playing Celestial Jade with Qingqua. They wouldn't need to be deep or emotional storylines, just small moments and casual hangouts that help us connect with these characters in a more personal way. And it's not like Star Rail hasn't done this before. The whole room renovation event is full of these kind of moments. Now, I admit, I wasn't the biggest fan of how they handled the Trailblazers room itself, but I really did enjoy the chores you had to do in between renovations. Those tasks gave us a peek into the daily lives of the Astral Express crew. It was hilarious watching Dan Hung try to use ancient Cloudham magic to mop the floor, or seeing Welt organize an esports tournament. These little moments offered a great insight into their personalities and how they interact with one another. The real issue was that most of these scenes were just static images with walls of text. It didn't quite feel like you were there hanging out with them. And this is where the developers need to put in some real effort, because for a hangout system to truly work, it has to have a certain level of production value. It can't just be characters standing around in existing environments while we read walls of text. We need unique locations, fresh animations that show actual interactions with the characters, and voice acting to really bring these moments to life. Star Rail is an adventure across a vast universe, yet outside of quests, we barely get to see these characters engage with this world. These small moments of downtime wouldn't just help us connect more deeply with these familiar characters, they'd also add depth and vibrancy to the world itself. I mean, if Genshin can pull this off, there's no reason Star Rail can't too. In fact, Genshin's hangouts are some of the best content in that game because they hit all the right notes for what a hangout should be. They might even surpass some of the companion quests simply because they keep a spotlight on the featured character instead of getting sidetracked by some random NPC. Some of my favorite hangouts were actually with characters I didn't much care for at first, like Diona and Bennett, but after spending time with them and getting a glimpse into their everyday lives, I found myself liking and relating to them in ways the main story would never allow. These hangouts did exactly what they were supposed to, deepen your connection to older characters, all while keeping the scope and production budget at a manageable level. So my TLDW solution for keeping a character relevant is I basically want Genshin's hangouts in Star Rail. For me, I genuinely believe that there are meaningful ways to connect with characters outside of major questlines. Sure, it's the emotional arcs and personal struggles that often leave the biggest impact, but sometimes the quiet, everyday moments can be just as powerful. Watching characters deal with mundane problems or simply relax gives them a sense of humanity. It makes them feel real, alive, and relevant beyond just their roles in the main story. After all, Star Rail isn't just about saving worlds, it's about the journey. And I for one really do believe the devs will eventually find a way to let us spend more time with these characters, to hang out with them, and to explore the universe we've all come to love in ways that are a little more personal and a little less epic. So, to wrap things up, are Star Rail characters becoming irrelevant? No, their stories are too powerful for that. But do they feel forgotten? Yes, because there's no way to interact with them once their story is finished. The fix I'm asking for is to implement gameplay systems and events like birthdays and hangouts so we get a chance to see them without disturbing the main events of the story. Now, I leave the floor open to you. Tell me, do you think I'm wrong and Star Rail characters are becoming irrelevant? Do you think a solution like a hangout system is good? And if you had the chance, who would you hang out with in the Star Rail cast? Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. If you enjoyed our time together, be sure to help me out by liking and sharing the video. Links in the description if you want to buy me a coffee, and if you're new around here, hi, I'm the Star Rail Crusader, and I would forever be in your debt if you hit that big red subscribe button.
A very special shout out to Baron Nocturne and Will S. You guys are amazing.
Your support truly means the world to me, and I am incredibly grateful. I'll do my best to keep creating content that you and hopefully many others will continue to enjoy and connect with. And with all that said, may your journey lead you ever starward.